Generally, how many interviews are there in Paytm?
We do close to 3 to 4 rounds of discussions, and the exact number will vary depending on what level you are looking to hire. But 3 to 4 rounds is what anybody can expect.
One comparison that I definitely do from Paytm wallet versus UPI is that loading screen gives me most. So one of the biggest reason of my blood pressure increasing or my anxiety increasing is that loading screen when payment is happening, which was never the case with Paytm wallet. So if I'm in a hurry, I'm in a remote location. Let's say I recently visited Coimbatore and I was in a remote place, and that took a very long time. And during that time, my heart rate was significantly high. What are the problems, or have you faced any of those people complaining about that loading screen increasing their anxiety?
They do, and see, ultimately it is very simple that payment options which provide you one-click experience or one-tap checkout or payment experiences will always have a better performance compared to payment options which will have slightly a higher number of steps, right? And because every step, if you look at, and the way we call it as funnel measurement in product, that every step is a way of losing customers, right?
Absolutely.
And you have to sort of make sure that every step is as super optimized as possible to reduce the drops as much, right? So that is the reason we invest in Paytm Wallet. I mean, Paytm Wallet as a product experience, personally I find it very refreshing because it's a single click checkout, just like you said, and a lot of users also. But kind of it is also important to make sure that even those options which have multiple steps, what are we doing to sort of mitigate or reduce the probability that there is a drop? And for the loading time, what for example you talked about, right, requires a very careful degree of analysis to look at whether it is your device internet which is an issue, or whether there are interactions between the system APIs, the front end and the back end platform, and is there scope of improvements there which you can do to reduce those times, right? So that's a classic product identification problem and solution which you need to sort of.
Interesting. So let's talk specifically about Paytm product manager interviews. So how somebody, or how easy or difficult it is for someone to switch to product management at Paytm, maybe on a role of associate a product manager or a product manager. What is the interview process and how our audience or people watching this video can get benefit from it?
Sure, Samyak. So see, ultimately the idea is that in Paytm what we try to look for are product managers who essentially have 2 or 3 key skill sets or attributes which basically will help them, according to us, succeed as PMs in general as well as specific to Paytm. So one is the fact that we look for very exceptional ownership skills, because according to me, we expect PMs to sort of own end-to-end their product which they are responsible for. The second is kind of something which we call as attention to detail. Okay. And these are my versions of those qualities which I personally also look at, which is basically the fact that are you able to sort of analyze a problem not from what we call as scratching the surface, but look at depth in terms of what are those aspects which is actually causing a problem statement which requires a solution, or an area of opportunity to invest into. Because I mean, in my book, product managers are the best visionaries as well in terms of identifying what should be built, right? And that happens when you are able to do a lot of meticulous research, which is attention to detail. And the third is the aspect called as empathy, which is how well are you able to connect with the problem statement or the users of your product, and are you able to understand their problems as your problems, right? Because there is a bias which happens, right? A lot of times you may find your product to be very super successful. For example, I used to when I was actually looking at success rates product in Paytm, I used to find that every time I was making a payment using Paytm, it used to go like super fast. I used to never experience any failure. It was easy for me to imagine that there is a bias that, you know what, failures do not happen as much. When I look at data, that gives me a different story, because different cohorts at different levels may get failures too, and failures will happen. So empathy basically comes as a point that are you able to connect with your consumers' problems rather than your problems, right? And remove that bias and look at problems at a more transparent way and solve them. So these are the three aspects which we look at. The way for sort of the way we look to sort of hire PMs in our org as well as in general is very simple, because we essentially look to sort of test these skills, which is by a version of sort of doing case studies rounds with them, understanding their background, understanding what if there are problems of a similar scale or even a lesser scale which they have solved, and directly or indirectly, because we expect not everyone would have got this opportunity to solve problems at all times.
Right.
But what is the method or approach they go in towards solving problems which are presented to them? It could be realistic problem, it could be hypothetical problem, and that's where case comes in as a method of sort of understanding that, and typically look at that all the different aspects centered around these three qualities which I just talked about, and that's it. I mean,
generally, how many interviews are there in Paytm?
We do close to 3 to 4 rounds of discussions, and the exact number will vary depending on what level you are looking to hire. But 3 to 4 rounds is what anybody can expect, and which are basically done by folks in product management and slightly associated domains as well, like engineering, for instance.
So do you expect some of the nuances related to, let's say somebody is giving an interview for a product manager role in payments. So do you expect some nuances for this person to know about Paytms and what are Paytm payments? So what are those, if let's say 3-4 any nuances that you should know about payments?
See, fundamentally we don't expect
Okay.
because we essentially look for the fact that if a person is product manager in my view has to be a generic expert, meaning that you can essentially, if you have the right attitude to solve a product problem, you can do that in payments, you can do that in e-commerce, you can do that anywhere else, right? So we don't expect people to have a payments background for sure. While of course there will always be candidates who have a payments background who will understand a problem statement relatively quickly, but in my view that difference basically evens out in long term. So that's not a criteria specifically, and hence the idea is that it is more to focus on fundamentals, which is how do you structure your problem statement well, rather than focusing upon key aspects. Obviously, it is good to be aware of your surroundings. It is good to know that what is payments happening in India, how are other industries or categories working in India, but the more larger or the important part is focusing on how you go about in structuring a problem statement. So
you mentioned that case study is a very, very important for people applying for PM in Paytm, from where they can learn to make or detailing of specific case studies, from where they can learn. Are there any resources available, or they can be any?
My recommendation would be slightly unorthodox to be to put it that way, because I don't recommend that. Obviously, there are a lot of resources available in the market which I am not 100% aware of, or I am not in the best position to answer them. But the idea is that ultimately it is how you think about problems which exist in your surroundings. So for example, I remember way back in 2012 or 2013, my first couple of years, my professional experience, one of a product leader actually asked me about looking at a pet bottle which existed, which was kept on the table, and he basically just asked me about features which I think should be improved in the bottle, right? And that was a case study in itself. You don't need to sort of talk about, you can pick up anything. For example, the kind of t-shirt you're wearing, right? And talk about what are the 5 things you may want to improve upon your product. Now that needs different levels of thinking to solve about what is the kind of problem statement this t-shirt is solving, for instance. What kind of an audience it attracts, right? And then look to think on those principles, and then look to come up with options which might be a better alternative than what you are wearing as a t-shirt, right? Or
so attention to detail about anything should be a very, very important quality. Let's say you are booking anything. So I have mentioned in some of my earlier interviews that I generally ask a question saying, tell me one product that you absolutely love, and people generally say WhatsApp. Some of them say Craig.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's a tech platform or tech app, or it's a app basically, but every day uses toothbrush. That's a product in itself. So attention to detail about anything is a very, very important quality. I'll just reiterate what Abhishek has mentioned. Three things. Number one is ownership. Number two, attention to detail. And third is empathy. Three things that are very, very crucial for you to know to apply for any product job across India or across globe. So three things very important.
In our opinion, just to clarify, because
Yeah,
you may
yes.
get other opinions as well, but yeah, that's how.
But I definitely agree with what Abhishek has mentioned because these are the most crucial things.